And as we bring this discussion to a close, it's important to slow down and really think about what all of this means in a practical, everyday sense. Not just in theory, not just in legal textbooks, but in your actual life as a driver navigating real roads, real rules, and real consequences. Because at the end of the day, most traffic cases don't turn on dramatic courtroom arguments. They turn on small details: a missed sign, a misunderstood rule, a moment where you assume something worked one way when, legally, it works another. In my legal analysis, that is exactly why so many drivers lose cases they thought they would win. Not because they were reckless, not because they were intentionally breaking the law, but because they didn't fully understand how the law is interpreted and applied in real situations. And that brings us back to the core issue behind this entire topic. Knowledge is not just power in the legal system. It is protection. Courts don't evaluate what you meant. They evaluate what you did, what the law says, and what can be proven. That gap between intention and legal reality is where most problems begin. There is a strong constitutional argument that due process under the 5th and 14th Amendments requires fairness in enforcement. But fairness does not mean leniency. It means consistency. It means the rules apply the same way to everyone, whether you know them or not. Courts would likely examine whether enforcement was lawful, whether your rights were respected, and whether procedures were followed. But they will not excuse a violation simply because a driver was unaware of a rule. That's the hard truth. And it's also why understanding traffic law is not optional anymore. It's essential. Now, let's talk about something many people overlook. When you challenge a traffic ticket, you're not just arguing facts. You're stepping into a structured legal system with its own standards, its own burdens of proof, and its own expectations. You're expected to present your case clearly, respectfully, and based on law, not emotion. That's where many drivers make a critical mistake. They focus on what feels unfair instead of what is legally relevant. In my legal analysis, the most effective defenses are not emotional. They are precise. They focus on procedure, evidence, and legal interpretation. They ask questions like, was the stop lawful? Was the evidence reliable? Were my constitutional rights respected? Those are the questions that matter. There is also a broader reality here that cannot be ignored. Traffic enforcement today is more advanced than ever. Technology, data systems, automated enforcement tools, these have changed the landscape completely. That means the margin for error is smaller, and the importance of understanding the rules is greater. At the same time, states continue to update and revise traffic laws. What was acceptable 5 years ago may not be acceptable today. What was a minor infraction in one state could be a major violation in another. This is where the federal versus state legal framework becomes critical. Traffic laws are primarily state-based, which means every state has its own rules, its own procedures, and its own penalties. But constitutional protections, like those under the 4th Amendment, apply across all states. That creates an interesting balance. States can enforce their own laws, but they must do so within constitutional limits. And when disputes arise, courts step in to interpret how those limits apply. That's why Supreme Court precedent matters, even in something as routine as a traffic stop. Cases interpreting search and seizure, due process, and lawful detention all shape how traffic laws are enforced. They define what officers can do, what drivers can expect, and how courts evaluate disputes. And this is where things get even more interesting. In my legal analysis, we are seeing a gradual shift toward greater scrutiny of enforcement practices. Courts are increasingly attentive to how laws are applied, not just what the laws say. That doesn't mean enforcement is weakening. It means it is being examined more closely. And that has long-term implications. It means drivers who understand their rights and their responsibilities are in a stronger position than ever before, not to avoid the law, not to challenge it recklessly, but to engage with it intelligently. Because that's the real goal here. Not conflict, not resistance. Understanding. Understanding how the system works. Understanding where you stand within it. Understanding how to navigate it responsibly and lawfully. Now let's bring this back to you. Every time you get behind the wheel, you are entering a legal environment. You are operating under a set of rules that are constantly evolving. And whether you realize it or not, your decisions in those moments can have legal consequences. Sometimes small, sometimes significant. So the question becomes, what kind of driver do you want to be? One who guesses or one who knows? Because the difference between those two can be measured in fines, points on your license, increased insurance costs, and in some cases, much more serious consequences. In my legal analysis, the safest and smartest approach is always the same. Stay informed, stay aware, and stay within the law. That doesn't mean you need to become a lawyer. It simply means you need to respect the fact that the law is detailed, structured, and sometimes more complex than it appears on the surface. And that brings us to something I want to leave you with. The law is not designed to trap you. It is designed to regulate behavior in a way that promotes safety, order, and fairness. But it only works as intended when people understand it. That's where responsibility comes in. Your responsibility, not just to follow the law, but to understand it. Not just to react to situations, but to anticipate them. Not just to rely on assumptions, but to rely on knowledge. Because in a legal system, assumptions can be expensive. Very expensive. So as you move forward, keep this in mind. Every sign you pass, every rule you follow, every decision you make behind the wheel, it all matters. And the more you understand, the better protected you are. If this helped you see things a little more clearly, then take a moment to be part of the conversation. Share your thoughts respectfully. Different perspectives matter, and thoughtful discussion is how we all learn. And if you want more clear, professional breakdowns of laws that affect your everyday life, make sure you stay connected, because the law doesn't stand still, and neither should your understanding of it. Drive smart, stay informed. And remember, knowing the law isn't just an advantage, it's your responsibility.